let me ask you this question. I would like to ask the AG to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, for an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their
right.
Yes. A right, the right that someone has. All our rights exist in context.
What is the context of a second medical opinion?
Because you're disrespecting the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you seem to do, you're just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues. If one, you can't bring and pull the leaders of the African community together, you're failing. And if two, you can't put forward a future, a blueprint, and a plan for African Guyanese, you're failing as well.
Wednesday evening to you. This is the Freddie Kissoon Show. Alongside me is a student of mine, was a student of mine many, many moons ago. Since then, she has chalked up a name for herself in Guyana as a social activist. AudreyAnna Thomas is our guest, one of Guyana's enduring social activists, and she will tell you about what she's been doing. We start with a movement she founded in building our dream Guyana, and she was the presidential candidate of that body, of that movement, or that organization. But the organization did not participate in the 2025 elections. So I asked her why, from presidential candidate to social activist, why you did not pursue your presidential ambition?
Thank you for this opportunity to share my views, my thoughts.
And I hope when I taught you at UG, you remember all those philosophers and you apply it in
Of course, John Locke.
Yes.
And Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Thomas. Now,
I do.
From presidential, anticipated presidential candidate, now that has been left behind. Why?
Okay, so I think that, and this is a confession. If you've not been a part of politics or a political party, there is a certain level of naivety, I would say, that you come into the political arena with. And to be true to myself, I realized that there was some degree of naivety on my part in thinking that the Guyana had reached a stage where somebody like me could have put forward yourself as a presidential candidate, as an option, and I would have gathered the financial support. So I thought that established political parties would have also welcomed you with open arms. But I soon learned that that was not so.
But let us shape the parameters. A ruling party anywhere in the world would see a challenger or challengers with some skepticism, because remember, they're the ruling party, and if they could have no competition, it is better than there's no competition. But the opposition parameters would welcome more contestants, because there is more pressure on the incumbent party because they have more competitors. So there are two angles. You made a general statement that established political parties didn't welcome you. I am saying that there is more reason for an incumbent party or a ruling party to be wary of the field having too much competitors. But the opposition, should they take a different approach and say, look, the more people on board, the more likely we have a big rainbow coalition. So, are you saying both sides of the political fence did not welcome building of a dream Guyana?
What I find is that I agree with you. The political party that's in power, it's understandable that they would do whatever is within their power and even outside of their power to some extent to prevent or to reduce the competition. In terms of the opposition, I think my challenge was that I was promoting myself or advocating our movement and also myself as the presidential candidate. And therefore, I think from an opposition standpoint, it also created some issues there in terms of even people, and this is based on my analysis in retrospect. So even with people engaging with you, I felt that there was an assumption that she wants to be the presidential candidate and maybe she's not going to enter into discussions and negotiations with us. And I think this is where one of the things I find in Guyana is that our communication is, but it's not one of the things, I think it's also scientifically so our communication is more implied than expressed. In countries like the United States and Canada, for example, United States, I would say, their communication is more expressed. It's more in black and white. For example, I might have been putting forward myself as a presidential candidate. Other opposition parties might have engaged me and say, is it that you only want to be the presidential candidate, or are you prepared to
subsume yourself
exactly. So in some countries where the communication is more expressed, that discussion might have been possible. What I found was that discussion, because our communication is more implied, people assume that you're putting forward yourself as a presidential candidate, so therefore maybe there's no room for negotiation. I must say that there was some engagement from the opposition, because I eventually ended up campaigning with the Working People's Alliance as a part of the Partnership for National Unity.
Okay, but you said in other lands there would have been some engagement as to, look, we'd like to have you, but we have our presidential candidate. Would that be all right if there's a merger of a working relationship? You are saying none of the political parties never called Ms. Thomas and said, Ms. Thomas, look, you have joined the field competing for power. Could you work with us for an eventual merger to contest the 2025 election, but not as the presidential candidate? There were no reaching out for a discussion as to how the relationship could be shaped?
No, there was no such discussion. However, the WPA established contact with me and invited me to be a part of their platform as a part of the Partnership for National Unity.
Okay, it's a coalition with constituent parts, and you felt of those constituent parts, you accepted WPA because the WPA reached out to you. No other party in APLE reached out to you.
No other party reached out to me, and I accepted the WPA for two reasons. One, they reached out to me, and two, And I felt that the approach that is required in the current context, which is more sort of an assertive approach, I could have, I felt that the WPA has a posture of being more assertive, which I found to be a more relevant approach as against in the current political context and political and economic context, as against a more, what would you say, a more concessionary approach, and or an approach or an approach where it's a more softer approach. Let me put it that way.
What about putting oneself in other people's place? And that is one of the fault lines of civilization. What about if you would put yourself in their place and say, listen, I'm the new kid on the block. Let me go and see dialogue with Forward Guyana, win the PNC, Alliance for Change. What did you reach out to any one of them and say, look, I'm contesting the elections. How do you see me in a relationship with your party? Suppose they were saying, she has to come to us. Why should we reach out to her?
I did reach out. I wouldn't say with who, but or with which party or parties, but I did reach out, and I thought that they and people had, promised to get back to me, and they didn't.
Do you think, apart from your theory of communication not expressed, do you think the reason for that attitude to you is that people didn't want another party contesting power? It's better if the field is narrower, it's better if the field has less contestant. Do you think the perception was, you got three of us, we don't want 4, 5 more into this thing? Do you think that could have been the thinking?
I think that to some extent, yes, in the same way the party in government would have been trying to reduce the competition. I figured that the opposition also might have been had that same approach. But nevertheless, I think the PPP do more talking behind the scenes than the opposition. I think that one gets the impression because, and one way to justify this is that you would see in the media, this person from the opposition is taken out a photograph with the vice president or with somebody in the PPP, and then you would have realized that didn't just happen. There were discussions, intense discussions, which were going on behind the scenes. So if there's one bit of advice or suggestion that I can make to the opposition, that you need to do more talking. But for some reason, I find that, at least this is my experience, and I've been discussing, having some conversations with someone who understands the Ghana political situation and economic situation very well. And he was saying the same thing to me. He said that the PPP people, they talk more among each other than the people in the PNC and the opposition. And so I felt that, to answer your question, that even if they had felt that way, it was an assumption. And we could have had conversations and discussions I guess another thing is that people might have thought that I don't have a constituency or I didn't bring, but that's an assumption even. I have the East Bank constituency. I was born and bred on the East Bank. So I consider that to be my constituency. But because I've never been in politics, then that constituency, or in quotation marks, could not have been linked to what I bring politically. And so this is East Bank, Lower East Bank. I would say from Supply to Timeri, and then
That's a big jump
from Supply to Timeri, as well as on the Okiara Cabra, I would say on the Suicide Linden Highway.
That's
my constituency, I would say. That used to be my playground, I would say. I went to school, I have, peers colleagues from school, I have family members. So I call that my constituency. Nevertheless, so all of these things could have been discussed if I had the opportunity to have a conversation. But and this is not, I'm not blaming the parties also. I'm just saying that the approach could have been different, but it's not necessarily saying that I was right, that they were wrong. In addition to that, I think I'm seen more as someone who was bringing more conceptual and technical expertise as against coming with a constituency. And I don't know, and to some extent, I think people were dismissive of that conceptual and technical expertise that I was bringing. Because I will fast forward a bit to tell you, building our dream Guyana, I had some people who I call my advisors and professionals who were giving me ideas as to how to develop a building our dream Guyana economic and social development plan, perhaps a 15-year plan for Guyana. And I was writing all those things in the press. Do you know now the PPPC government is implementing a lot of those ideas because one, they're in government, two, they have the resources, and three, it was free technical and conceptual thinking. So they're implementing those ideas now. A lot of those ideas they're implementing. So there's value. There was value then, and there still is value now to the conceptual and technical expertise which I thought I brought to the political arena.
But you are either you being overly generous or over generous, or you being diplomatic, because you have cited two horizons that you have walked on that were very thorny. One is that people felt that it's best to have less competitors in the opposition. And secondly, within that framework, there were people who, didn't like what was a bit either jealous or insecure, or didn't want the technical projections in Build Guyana Dream campaign that you were offering. Looked at from any angle, Ms. Thomas. Looked at from any angle. That is an assertion that would make some people say, what? When they look at this program, say, what? Is that what she experienced? You're actually saying I wasn't greeted with open arms and saying, yes, let's contest power. But I get the feeling that you want to travel on that generous diplomatic thing. It's one thing I remembered about you when you were my student. And I remember not many students you remember after teaching thousands of them for 26 years. But I had a good rapport with you. And you've always been an assertive person. So I wasn't surprised when I saw you in the press and you formed an organization. I said, this is the AudreyAnna Thomas I knew. And I would like to think that in those days, I felt that, you would break out somehow because at UG you were always assertive. Let me ask you now, what is Build Dream Guyana doing? What are they doing? What is the organization doing for Guyana? What they up to because they no longer there.
So before I get to that point, one of the things I realized also by putting myself out there as the presidential candidate, jumping into the political arena, the government also came at me, I thought, with the force of the state. And that is part of them using whatever means that was within their power to reduce the competition. And I realized eventually that I couldn't do this and survive in this first attempt without the support of an organization. So hence I was willing to be a part of an organization, not necessarily as the presidential candidate, because that organization would have provided some amount of protection against the force of the state. But when you're out there by yourself, maybe with a few people who cannot come forward either, they're behind the scenes, so you're the face, and the state is coming at you with the full force of the state, it could become very disillusioning at some point because it is you against the government that is in power, the political party that is in power, that has control of the force of the state. So, but to answer your question now in terms of what Building Our Dream Guyana movement is doing, we've never evolved into a political party. We've always been sort of an ad hoc group, testing the waters. Now we're evolving into a movement, and we've shifted our focus from politics to economic and social, I would say, to building economic and social stability in communities and for families. So our focus now is on communities and families. And what I say to the groups that I'm working with is that it doesn't matter who gets into government in 2030. You, your family, and your community must have economic and financial stability. And so we are working now to help families and communities to develop economic and social stability, or to create the conditions for them to have economic and economic stability and independence. So come 2030, you don't have to wait for your party to get into government for you to get a job. And because particularly from 2020, I think Guyana has changed tremendously, and we can come to that a little later. But let me wrap up on this point. So the communities that I am working with at this point, the communities where we're, so the focus is on building your dream community. What is your dream community? Let's help you to build that. Building your dream family. What is your dream family? Let's help you to build that. And building your dream life. Somebody said, don't forget, build your dream life too. And to help people to build their dream life. What is your dream life? And let us help you to build that. So we've been working with some communities. We've also been, families make up communities, particularly at the village level. And what I find is that while there's need for political leadership, there's a huge gap and need for technical leadership at the level of the villages. And so what I bring to the villages is technical leadership. I'm a sustainable development practitioner and a rule of law advisor by training and profession. And so I bring that to the villages. I bring that to communities. I bring that to families.
You had an interview. Ms. Thomas, you would know, I taught you as a political theory lecturer. Therefore, my area has always been that. You know that. So I look at every nook and cranny for political things. And I saw an interview with you as a guest of David Hans. The other guest was Takuma Ogunse. And I can tell you that interview, whether you recognize it or not, had a tremendous amount of political learning about what Guyana is about. I looked at the interview and I said, neither Hines nor Ogunse understand what you were saying. And I said to myself, students of politics should look at this interview. None of them knew what you were saying. So what you were saying? One, you said that, look, Norton should leave as the leader of the People's National Congress. Secondly, you said, when you are struggling for people, when you're struggling for a community, you have to have leaders and generals, and that's the word you use, generals, to carry the struggle. And you made a reference that sometimes when you, and you said you don't know if it's my column, but you quoted and you said you think it's Freddie Kissoon. But it was me that said that when David Hines looked over his shoulder, his soldiers weren't there. And that is why they were reduced to 32 parliamentary seats to 12. Now you were telling these two guys, if you're going to fight for the people, you have to have leaders that the people accept and want. And instead of listening, you kept lecturing you, telling you, man, politics is a serious thing. Politics, you got to understand politics. And there you were, understanding the politics of Guyana better than him by saying, look, if you're going to lead people, you have to have the right leadership. Therefore, Mr. Norton should go. You want to talk about that interview, which I think is pregnant with political theory of Guyana's political direction?
Yes, I'll talk about the interview, but before I talk about the interview, I'd like to say two things. One is that after that interview, when I said that I think Mr. Norton should go, I felt that I said what I had to say, and it's not that I would go on every program now saying that Mr. Norton should go, because I felt that it had the impact and the effect that I wanted it to have. And the other thing I'd like to say is that David Hines and I call him Brother Ogun, are my brothers. And I don't think, so now I'm going to answer your question. I don't think it is that they did not understand what I was saying. I've worked in development with international organizations for over 20 years. And to some extent, there's a level of well, I would say also working in the diplomatic community. I've also been a communications person for over 20 years also. And what people say in public, or the way they say it in public, is not necessarily the way they would say it in private. So I would not conclude that Dr. David Hines and Brother Ogunse did not understand what I was saying. But I felt that they the time when I was saying it did not allow them to say, well, yes, AudreyAnna, we understand what you're saying. Because, I also work with the courts. And in courts, I worked at the High Court. I used to be a judge's registrar to the Chief Justice, etc. And in the High Court, you have open court matters and chambers matters.
Yeah.
Chambers matters is not open to the public. It's heard in the chambers of the judges, and only the two parties are involved in those matters. So I think that there's a feeling that saying that Aubrey Norton should go, or whether Aubrey Norton should go or not, that's a chamber matter, not an open court matter. But I think in the current Guyana context, it is an open court matter, because what has happened to, so that's one. I think they understood what I was saying. Two, I think what has happened since 2020 has made saying in public that at this point in time, the PNCR needs a new general. What I'm saying is not to point Aubrey Norton to the door. Aubrey Norton has institutional knowledge. He is a political scientist by training. So there's a lot of value that he brings to the PNC and to the APN and to the APNU. But I think what they're doing, they are mixing up the issues. And by mixing up the issues, I mean that people are saying that, I read some of the comments after that program, and people were saying that she's a Mohammed girl, because I mentioned about calling Mr. Mohammed at the Chimeri station, but we needed political representation. So I called him for political representation. That was the first time in my life I spoke with Azudin Mohammed. And then some people say that people want to take over the PNC. And people want to, I saw one of the comments that said, if you want to go over to win, you don't have to pull down Mr. Norton. And so all of those comments helped me to understand that there is, coming back to your point as to whether people are really understanding. So while I think Dr. Hines and Brother Ogun understands, they understood what I was saying, I think in terms of the general public and the supporters of the PNC, there is a feeling that people want to take over the PNC. Or they want to, if I wanted to go to be a WIN supporter, I don't have to go on that program and say that Aubrey Norton should go. All I had to do was quietly go and support WIN. And then the next thing you know, you see me in a photograph with Mr. Mohammed supporting WIN. That's all I had to do. I didn't have to put myself out there to be criticized by saying this. But I was saying to a PNC person, I said it because I care enough to put myself out there and to say what I think needs to be done and what other people think needs to be done, but they wouldn't say it in public. To further explain what I'm saying, in 2020, what has happened? Ghana has become an oil and gas producing and oil and gas production and producing and exporting country. And so Ghana has now become a high income development country. So the oversight that international organizations used to provide to Guyana through aid, etc., that oversight is no longer provided. Then you had a government, the PPPC government, that came into power with a lot of money and power. So that's two. And then what you had was, and they're not afraid to wield that power. And then you had, so we're in this situation where, and then you have now the whole social and economic dynamics in Guyana is changing. We have so many foreigners coming into the country. We have so many foreign investors coming into the country. And it seems like everybody is finding their niche. And How do you help your constituency in this context to find their niche? And you can't wait until the next election to do that. So even though the APNU and the PNC are in opposition, what can you do to mobilize your constituency or your constituencies around social and economic development and stability? So when I said that, so what I believe that the APNU, they're doing, there are 4 levels of listening. And the 2 I'm going to point out, one is selective listening, and the highest level of listening is emphatic listening. And so I think what at this point the APNU and the PNC, they're doing is selective listening. Selective listening is where you listen to respond, to justify, to explain. Emphatic listening is where you listen to the heart of what the people is saying, to the heart of what your constituency is saying, where you listen to and from that you realize that, look, we need to make some fundamental changes. In addition to that, in terms of change, profound change happens when desperate times require desperate measures. So the reason I said that Aubrey Norton needs to go as the current general for the PNC and the APNU, he can be, in terms of, they need to have somebody who from now will start to shape or reshape, conceptualize, reconceptualize, reimagine the role that the PNC can play in this current context where there's a level of bombasticness, if I can call it that, that is coming from the PPP with the power of oil money and international support and all the rest of it. So how do you reconceptualize the PNC and the APNU? One, to politically deal with that, right? For example, before 2020, when after the elections, governments were going after, for example, the people who were, let's say, in the previous government, the ministers, etc. This, from 2020, the PPP went after supporters of the APNU and AFC, and they continue to go after them. But what is required to mitigate that situation is a political response, and that political response has to come from the PNC, for example, and the APNU. So as a part of that reconceptualizing, how do we lead within this current bombasticness that we're getting from the PPP, and in terms of being a shield for our supporters and designing and carving out a pathway for our supporters, and not just waiting until 2030. You need new leadership. You need a new general to do that. So Aubrey Norton can play the role, and I'll close on this point here. Aubrey Norton can play a role of, I think people are concerned about Burnham's organization, the PNC. And if the PPP goes, and if the Aubrey Norton goes, who's going to protect Fox Burnham party? So I think they're mixing up the issues here in terms of the organizational things as it relates to the PNC and the presidential, the political electoral role. So I think perhaps if I'm to propose a solution, because people may say, okay, you've said all of that. What is your solution? What do you think is a solution? I think a solution is that Aubrey Norton can be manage the organization, protect Fox Burnham organization. But as it relates to the electoral candidate, as it relates to the next presidential candidate, I think they need to sort that out. Last point on that, I don't quite understand the Democratic Party and the Republican in terms of the DNC and the RNC. But I think what you have the chairman of the RNC and the chairman of the DNC, and please correct me if I'm wrong, who they deal with the organizational things as it relates to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But as it relates to the presidential candidate and the people who are involved in representing the various states, that's dealt with in a slightly different way. I stand corrected, you're the political expert.
Well, it's two different political situations. We have a Commonwealth tradition of politics where we have an official political leader that is seen as the embodiment of the party. The Republicans and the Democrats don't have that. Their presidential candidate, if he's successful, is seen as the leader of the party, de facto not the jure leader. It's two different situations. But what I want to ask you is that, are you sure that some of the interpretations you have of the government is not coming from misplaced perceptions? Like, there is a general feeling out there that there's been no other president that has the common touch that goes around the square miles of Guyana and trying to reach out to people and telling people, look, I'm your president, what do you want? What can I do for you? Do you seriously characterize the ruling party of the party that heads the government of Guyana as bombastic? You want to expand on that? You may not. You may have your preference, and we all have preference as to who should be in power. But that should not deny us the fact that each government since independence may have something that the Guyanese people appreciate.
Correct. I'd like to say, in terms of your response to my explanation to the previous question, you know what we're doing here? We are reimagining, in a sense, what, let's say, the PNC, the APNU, how they can reform. You give the explanation of with the Democrats and the Republicans. So, yes, it's not cast in stone, but how can we reimagine our reality? To come to answer your question now, you know, we have had a discussion on the difference between Barajagdio as a president and Irfan Ali as a president. And it was a very interesting discussion because...
Who's we?
This is we as in my groups who I interface with, particularly at the professional level. And so we were discussing, is there a difference between Barajagdio as president and Irfan Ali as president? And we've concluded that yes, there's a difference. With Barajagdio, we thought that Barajagdio was so politically astute that he understood limits. He understood political limits. And somehow we don't get the impression that President Ali understands political limits. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that.
Yeah, please,
right?
Because I don't want to be confused.
No. I'll explain to you what I mean by that. For example, something that shocked us and people who are, even if you're not supporters to the PNC, we're empathetic and sympathetic with the PNC and to the APNU. When the government broke down the PNCR building in Lethem, it shocked many of us. Hear what? Because we could not conceive, and we cannot conceive, and we will not support the PNC being in government, going and break down a PPPC building. There are certain limits that even though your parties are opposing each other, you must have political boundaries. And we felt that that was a political boundary that was crossed. But when I say a level of that we have not seen in my lifetime, certainly in my lifetime. So what we're saying, and so we were saying that if the PNC or APNU had done that, we would have been very loud
But the PNC,
in our
did, but the
criticism.
PNC did
Not in
that.
my lifetime.
But the PNC did that when they were in power from 2015 to 2020.
Oh,
they did.
which
when,
instance? In which
Red House. Which
Oh,
is regard,
no, but the Red House is more.
the government had to, the PPP had to take them to court.
Yes, but
they took over the Red
fine.
House.
But the Red House is still
And that is very sacred to the PPP.
fair enough. I understand that. But the Red House is different from Freedom House. And so I just wanted to make that. No, I'm saying in my mind, in my analysis.
No, but the Red House will have more sentiment. But I want to ask you something.
Yes.
You're going to attribute political limitations on the part of Penali because of that.
No.
Wasn't it the
making a
case of
second
legality
example.
that the building was not legally on legal property of the PNC? But I don't want
No, I was giving you another example in terms of Air Finale. So in terms of Air Finale, I'd like to say that while I appreciate a lot of young people say to me that they like how the president, I'm giving you the positives, they like how the president is going around and meeting with people, etc., etc. The other thing that people like about the PPP listens. They listen and they respond. The PPP, I would say, in some cases, is more responsive than the PNC or the APNU. And let me explain that. But the challenge with the PPP is that they would respond if you criticize them, you share the idea, they will take your ideas, go and implement them without even acknowledging where it came from, right? And while people are out there, can't feed the children and take care of their family, the PPP is implementing their ideas, but they're responsive. So the other thing that people thought was, I said to people, and I'll tell you this, when they were giving out the cash grant, the process was so simple in this last cash grant. I didn't take the first cash grant because I refused to take my photograph. The second time because it was before elections. And that's a major point. That's a minor thing. The second time I accepted the cash grant, but the process was so smooth. Within 3 days, the money was in the bank. And I said to somebody, I like it, right? But I was speaking in that particular context, right? So there are things that I think, for example, all the roads the government is building, they're opening up new lands. Those are positive things. They're doing it's a big positive in terms of the roads that they're opening, where they open up new lands. The other thing is where there is
to signal our times.
Okay, in terms of infrastructure, I think we need balance. So there are positive things that the government is doing under the Air Finale administration.
Cool.
But they I think that this is where when I talk about the bombasticness, I share this experience on the program while the president is on the surface going around and saying all of the nice things. What is happening to supporters and perceived supporters of the APNU and the PNC, right, does not align with that. Let me share with you quickly.
No, we quickly.
With the I'm working. I share the example with farmers on the West Bank, and we wrote the Ministry of Agriculture since November asking for assistance.
Yes,
they have not even acknowledged our letter. The regional chairman of Region 3, we asked for assistance. The regional chairman said to me, there is something named self-help, y'all know, right? And then he said they didn't budget for that. So you didn't budget to clear the dam for farmers to go into their communities. And we conclude that because many of the farmers are African Chinese farmers and supporters of the opposition.
Don't let's end on that. There's too much of that. Something happens and race comes into it. Why it cannot be a bureaucratic follow-up? Why it has to be race?
All right, let's retract that. Bureaucratic follow-up.
It's nice catching up with a former student of mine. Thanks for being on the program, and I wish you well in whatever you do socially, politically, and in your personal life. AudreyAnna Thomas, it's nice talking.
It was lovely talking with you, Mr. Kissoon. And this is where they say that as a student, I guess that you're seeing that what I would have learned that it's being manifested in one way or another. Thank you.
Thanks, let's pause for the captain. Catch